So with this general process, with the site selection, we are overlapping with Lancaster Farmland Trust preserved farms as they overlap with priority delisting catchments. Once we have the site selected, we then I then go to our data coordinator, Noelle, who will do a data pull from Practice Keeper, and she sends that to me, some of the raw data that we currently have. And then a step that recently came into light that needed to be done was some data prep to make sure that the data that we do have in Practice Keeper is up to date and that it matches the most recent available plan. And then I will, once I have all of my paperwork prepared ahead of time, I will go ahead and schedule and notify the landowners with a very general timeline. Currently, we do it with a letter, but we can also call. During the actual site visit itself, we inspect every BMP that is present, specifically NRCS code BMPs, as opposed to RI BMPs. So we just stick with the data that we get from ePhotog. The only times that we will hold off on verification is if a practice is a part of a federal program like CREP, or if the site is missing a plan entirely. But otherwise, we attempt to capture every practice that currently exists. So if it hasn't been installed, we can't verify it. After all of that, we take all of the observational notes and we upload that onto a tracking sheet, a massive spreadsheet that I have to keep track of the actual conclusions that we've come to, as well as where I'm at in my progress of like the paperwork and this process itself. So I'm oriented at all times. I will then use that tracking sheet to help me fill out verification forms. It's one form per BMP. And then I also compile a evidence document, which is essentially a compilation of all the photos taken from that site that justify the decisions to verify or deny verification. Once all of those forms are ready, we are able to then upload the forms and the photo evidence documents to Practice Keeper. And currently we are also uploading to FieldDoc as part of the requirement for the NIFWIF grant that I'm funded through. And then I keep track of my progress of the paperwork as well in that sheet. So from start to finish, that's generally what's involved. Give me 1 second. Let's see. Yes, I went through that. And then Allison had mentioned she wanted me to discuss how verification kind of fits in with the other departments here at the district. So verification, while similar, is very different from compliance. We are separate departments. We do not have any enforcement power. And my goal is to collect the data. And if I do see something concerning, I will first speak with the farmer. I will attempt to work with them, see what kind of limiting factors that's keeping them from doing what they need to do on their farm. And then I will kind of give that information over to our ag techs. As it says down here, I do not do outreach. My priority is to collect the data, and the ag techs are much more experienced and much more confident with that, and it's just generally outside of the scope of what I'm expected to do. So I will usually delegate that out to the ag techs, the engineers here, and if needed, the partners. And also when it comes to figuring out how to involve the partners and when, we are still working on that to kind of see at what point do we get other partners involved. Currently, we mostly prioritize our ag techs to get that information. We have been attempting to do some third-party collaborations as part of the CAP coordinator role. We have so far trialed with Lancaster Farmland Trust, Maori Environmental, and Team Ag. Thus far, Gordon and I have done the most number of sites together. He's been really great in this process. He's helped me train my eye on what it is that I'm looking for and to orient me to what it's like out on the farms. And we are continuing to work with Lancaster Farmland Trust on some future verification sites. We have some that will be coming up here shortly. We have also attempted two for-profit companies, Maori Environmental and Team Ag. We had practiced a few sites with Maori specifically, two of their technicians, to kind of give them a trial run, see if they thought verification would be worth their time, to kind of orient them with a little bit of training on what it is that would be expected of them should they join in on verification with me. The main issue that we had run into that was a barrier for third parties to continue to participate was that funding was not available. Because verification is entirely voluntary, there is no incentive for a landowner to pay for a service that is not necessary. And that's another distinction of how we are separate from compliance. Like, compliance comes, like, they're there to inspect. And theoretically, if a farmer did not want me there, I would leave. And then we would go back to the office and we would figure it out from there and see what we could do. Another thing that we have run into is job authority, which we need some clarification from DEP. Essentially, we have a few documents which I can submit in the chat for others to look at later on. But essentially, it details whether or not certain professionals have the job approval authority if they have the authorization to go out and do verification. It typically requires that they have an engineer on staff and that they have a certain level of training. And because I am part of the conservation district, I am automatically given the job approval authority in my position to be able to do this work. But for example, LFT does not currently have an engineer on staff, and so they are limited to what they can inspect. Specifically, they are able to do annual practices, so crop rotation, forage harvest management, and they are not allowed to do on their own without an engineer anything that's engineered by by staff. So terraces, manure storage, things of that nature. And some of the clarification we were looking for with DEP that they may or may not be able to give us anytime soon is how they want us to go about tracking the training, and also what types of trainings can be kind of interchangeable. So we are working on it. Some other general roadblocks that we have reached with verification. Sometimes there is no plan that we have access to in Practice Keeper. Either we don't have a copy or it doesn't exist. So we need to have that copy to be able to go out. And if we don't, we will hold off on that site until one has been obtained. One solution that I kind of came up with is that during the catchment lead meetings with Ryan Hill, as we go along, I would be checking which of the sites in the catchments we do actually have data for in Practice Keeper and what plans are available versus what plans are missing. I mean, that's a slow process of sifting through that data, but we're working on it. Another barrier is Practice Keeper data entry inaccuracies. Now, people have been entering data into this database for a very long time. A lot of differences in whether or not certain things are entered the way that it should be. And there are some things that we've been attempting to do to mitigate this, which is to hopefully make some adjustments to Practice Keeper to prevent some of those user errors. For example, implementation dates and plan dates. There are some ways that that can be accidentally entered incorrectly that can throw off a few different aspects of pulling data from Practice Keeper. And the way that we've been dealing with this thus far has been doing the data prep, which was in that infographic that I showed. That has been something that is rather time consuming. However, it is necessary because if we're putting all this work in to, collect accurate data and the data in the database is has some errors, we want to make sure that all the effort we're putting in is yielding accurate data. And so I've been focusing on that lately. Another thing that we've been having is we will accidentally come across errors in the plans themselves. In fact, it happens on occasion where say during the editing process in the plan review, a practice will be removed from the narrative, and occasionally it will have been forgotten to be removed from the map, or vice versa. That can lead to confusion as to whether or not a practice actually should be there or not, and where it's supposed to be. That can definitely slow down the process. And thus far, we have been looking to the operator to see if they can orient us and answer some of those questions while we are on site. Another thing that, while isn't too much of an issue, we do occasionally run into is if a plan update is in progress, we can't touch it yet. We want to make sure that we are working with the most recent updated plan. And sometimes that requires us also asking the farmer when we visit the site, hey, this is the plan that I've got. Have you gotten anything more recently that we don't have a copy of? And then if there is a more recent one, then we will request a copy from the operator or owner. One of the other bigger aspects of this is time and manpower. So each of the steps, primarily steps, hold on one second. Give me 1 second. Oh, I literally just downloaded it. Give me 1 moment.
While you're doing that, one thing you said was about within the delisting catchments, which parcels have conservation plans. So we did go through, Kevin helped to, for the delisting catchments, we have that information for every parcel, whether there's a conservation plan, and the date of it, I believe, and the manure management or nutrient management plan and the date of it. Would that help in your efforts at all?
Yes. Could you send a link of the specific spreadsheet you're looking at, because what I've been referencing is Ryan Hill's spreadsheet, which we go over during the catchment lead meetings. But if you're referring to another one, I could take a look at that and see where that gets us. And then one second. So just to refer back, the most time consuming steps as of right now are from steps 3 through 6. And that is because this is very, very detail oriented work. And it takes time. And thus far, we've been attempting to, join in some more third-party collaborators to maybe make this a bit more efficient and figure out what makes the most sense. But those are still in progress, and we are still feeling out what organizations would be interested and willing to work with us. And the last roadblock that I want to discuss was CAST. And Matt, and I had a conversation to kind of answer some of those questions to see where exactly the data that we are uploading to these databases, what is it doing, and why, like how exactly it either drops from the model or how verification like more technically works. And Mike, kudos to you for even remotely understanding it. It's very confusing. There are apparently multiple different lifespans. Correct me if I'm wrong, Mike. There are multiple different lifespans in which, after so many years, a practice or plan can drop out of the model. Which, which adds another layer of complication to a lot of this. And I'm going to have to refer to you, Mike, about this because Gordon and I had some more clarification questions that if today doesn't work to answer all of those, we can always set up another meeting. But we want to make sure that the way that we're capturing this data, the way that we're uploading it, that we understand exactly or approximately how it is actually impacting the Chesapeake Bay model. So we're trying to figure some of that out as well. Does anyone have any questions as of this point? Okay.
The way to solve it, Caitlin, is you and Gordon just need to go out every day and look at every BMP every day. I mean, we got no issues then.
Ain't happening.
Yeah, that is apparently thus far what we are going to be doing. Visiting every farm and verifying every practice regardless of the age, to help prevent data slipping through the cracks with multiple lifespans. It would be complicated to track. It might be possible, but it might not be very practical. So we're kind of trying to figure out, the way to go about this that makes the most sense, that keeps the data as accurate as possible. And it's been a challenge, but we are figuring it out. And if anyone has any ideas and
Caitlin, Caitlin, a question under box plan update progress.
Yes.
If we find a plan that's being updated or a new plan, shouldn't have to be any verification there, right? Because it's Focus Keepers. Those plans are, if it's an updated plan, that would get updated in there, correct?
So that's a good question. So as far as I know, that when we get a very recent plan update, as in 2024 plan update, the plan should theoretically detail whether or not something is specifically being reconstructed because it is no longer functional. And it'll put that practice back in as planned. And that would require us to take that data and make sure that it's updated in Practice Keeper, and then kind of go from there. So we do still, in fact, need the plan updates, and we want to hold off because if we go in with an old plan that where like the fields don't even match anymore, it doesn't actually make all that much sense for us to go. So typically we would hold off. But does that answer your question, or should I?
Yeah, you answered the question. You know, if it's a brand new plan, whether it's an update or a plan didn't exist, obviously you've got brand new data, put in Practice Keeper, and it's current for at least a year till the annual process is fall out. So then that kind of brings me to your point at the end about this task and this multiple data sets and which one do we focus on. So going out and verifying annual practices doesn't make a whole lot of sense because we'd have to go out every year. Like I said, we don't have time, manpower to do it. So is there another strategy rather than verifying every plan on the farm, that we stick with the ones that have the most bang for the buck in the model, so to speak? So would that be manure storage, heavy use area, you know, field structures?
Mike, would you be able to reference, because I remember when we had the Lunch and Learn meeting recently, you had mentioned that annual practices, there was some question that we had on whether or not annual practices counted in the model, and thus brought us questions, as like Gordon said, on whether or not we should be verifying them. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, so the and it matters which annual practice, but like say a conservation plan is technically an annual practice, but it's afforded a 10-year grace period before the model would say no longer recognize it. So it's assumed as only an annual practice, but there is this 10-year grace period. Most of the other practices, except for rotational and prescribed grazing, but like cover crops, no-till, all of that is answered by the Transect survey. That is the one, you know, and that's open for discussion. It's really based on the timing of the survey, how much it's going to capture. I think if there's an ability to add or beef up that count, that head count, you know, based on the 10% field review they do after the aerial survey, I mean, it could probably help, but then you're going down the rabbit hole of trying to do that every year then. So it's just back to, is there something better than the Transect survey that's similar in concept from like an aerial, and then whether it's 10, 15, 20% field confirmation, maybe it's just on the timing, but there's no good answer to say how to resolve that. And I think if you go down the route of trying to annually confirm those practices by field verifications, it's a big bite to chew off. It's going to be hard to do that every year.
And also to that point, so we had considered different what are called non-intrusive verification methods, like LiDAR and other forms of like aerial surveying. The downside is that with some of these practices, if you look at it from an aerial perspective, sometimes it is very obvious to tell yes, or to be able to make the distinction that this field is not verifiable. We are certain, like, look at that pasture, it's clearly just mud. Like, it's simple. However, to be able to in fact confirm it is more complicated, because if a pasture, you can't tell height. You can just see coverage. You can't tell if it's severely weedy. You can't even tell, like you can see things like erosion and bare spots, but it's limited in the ability to actually confirm verification with the way that we currently have verification processes. So in order to specifically take annual practices and upload them with our verification data into Practice Keeper, it has to be done on the ground to be able to make sure that it is genuinely accurate, because there's a lot of room for error, and we're attempting to prevent that, especially if we're going to be putting all this work into this.
If you can figure out how to quantify that error, Jill was very clear that if we come up with a way that gets us better, whether you call it accuracy or precision with the numbers, or an alternative method, that they would have no issues, as long as we give the backup of how we made the determination this is working for us. That we as an example, we brought up like the CBF aerial program they have, and then following that up with like a trial and error field test, and able to quantify sort of the level of error, the confidence interval with that, and that's working better, gets us better numbers or more confidence in the actual amount of cover crops or no-till or any of that. The state would have no issues taking our method and incorporating it in the QUAP addendum to submit to the Bay Partnership for approval. So that's on the table. It's just what is that is who wants to make that decision, what that's going to be. So
it would definitely take some, as of right now, Gordon and I are going to continue to approach this by capturing everything that is on site. But for long-term practicality, these are definitely really big questions we have to ask. And we can always continue to bring up as we go along in this, as this program continues to develop. But as of right now, just capturing everything that we can, especially since it's the first time that some of these sites have been visited ever. Getting at least a baseline of data for the catchments will definitely be our first step.
Mm-hmm. And maybe something will reveal itself in just one catchment, how you go about that process that could be, I don't know how, could be extrapolated, and that could turn out to be the process on some sort of rotational basis of catchments. But don't limit, I would say we shouldn't limit ourselves in how we think we can improve on that transect survey, and keep an open mind of what could or couldn't happen, but just with the intent of trying to get better data and what that level of effort is, because that can happen across a number of BMPs. Any BMP, and Jill said, more than welcome to submit, as long as we give the backup of how we determined it into the QUAP, and that turns into our methodology for verifications.
So Mike, this is a question that nobody's figured the answer out to it yet. I had the pleasure of sitting on a EPA task force for the last few months trying to figure out how to collect this data with USDA and EPA. And even there, we had 5 solutions at the end of the day, and really none of them practically are doable at this point. So to do all the farms in Lancaster County with the staff we have dedicated to it now, it'll never get done. So could we combine it with something else? Could we make it simpler? So what I'm thinking about is, we go out and we verify it. So Caitlin has set up a well-defined program where we go out, we have a form for each practice. We take 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 pictures of each practice. We put it in the data system, and as soon as it's entered, nobody ever looks at it again. So some of the documentation, like, my practical common sense farmer mind says, why do we need all this data, especially on an annual practice, which in a year it's going to be out the window, which somebody's got to go actually look at it again. We have the practice keeper data set, but it's inhibited from more value than it has because the plans are outdated. We don't have plans. They're not current plans. Is there any way we could combine this with like phase 2 of the inspection program, where we go out and actually review the plan, which would be another way of verifying practices on the farm, and put that accurate plan or updated plan in Practice Keepers? So you figure we got 5,000 farms in the county. If we could visit every farm once every 10 years, to me, that seems like the best way to get the data in the system and then maintain it after that. 500 farms, you'd need, pick the number, 3-4 people that were trained that could go out, review the plan needs to be updated, take it back to the office, update it, get it back to the farmer, and then get it in Practice Keeper. I don't know what I don't know here, so I'm probably overshooting the goal by a lot. But it just seemed all the work we're putting into this, and is there a faster way we can get to the goal and get the accurate data we need in Practice Keepers? As we continue to verify, one of the challenges is, we're kind of spot. It's like throwing darts at the county map. We're going to do it by catchments, part of it, but not every part of the county is in a catchment. So at some point in time, we'll have to veer away from catchments. And then where do we start? Do we go by township? Well, okay, all of a sudden we have a township and a quarter of the farms were verified 5 years ago. How do we track all this stuff? What would be the simplest way to do it? So this is just my, simple challenge of, obviously the best way to do this is get on the farm. Some of the annual practices, we can do that with LiDAR, aerial imagery, drive road trips and so forth, and get pretty darn good data with that. But those practices in the model don't carry the weight that some of the structures do. And the structures, you literally have to be there to look at it, such as manure storage. From the air, you can't tell if it's leaking or if the fence is 100%. If the push off is still there, there's tractor hanging. So I'm just throwing this out for discussion. And I'm sure you guys at the district have talked about this already. So maybe it's nothing new, probably isn't anything new. But like Caitlin said, all the work that's being put into this seems almost laborious for the net result we're getting. There's got to be a faster way to do this.
I agree.
It's definitely trying to figure out how do we make this efficient, practical, and accurate. And Gordon, if you would want to type up some of those ideas that you had, just because they're obviously some bigger picture questions to the long-term direction of this, if you could send those thoughts to me in an email so I can keep track of them as we continue to develop this, so we can keep it in mind and just kind of, I really value your input and I want to make sure that I have a physical copy of it.
As far as what you said, Gordon, about combining it with the inspection program, I agree with that 100%. And I've been saying that for a while. The DEP should have factored that in when they came out with the Bay program, because the whole verification thing has been an afterthought. And the most efficient way to have done this would have been do it as you're doing phase 2 inspections, because you're already walking around the farm and making sure that the plans are accurate and that the practices are being installed to the schedule. It's just even the manpower of that. I mean, right now we as far as Lancaster, we're only signed up to do 5 phase 2 inspections a year. All the rest of our inspections are phase 1s, just checking on plans. So they are incredibly time consuming, and I dread the day when we would get to the point of having to do all phase 2s, because it's not apples to apples when you're comparing how much time it takes for the phase 1 inspections versus the phase 2s. The phase 2, you're looking at half the day or more to go through and check on everything in the plan, check the records, physically look at the BMPs. But you're exactly right that this should have been set up to be done as you go through that process. But again, is it going to be done? Would it be done any quicker with the current staff? No, and it would actually limit even more who can do the actual inspections. So it would be only district and DEP staff.
How'd Lancaster County get away with only 5 phase 2s?
Because the way they have it in the contract, you got to get through all your phase 1s first. Well, at 50 per position per year, right now we have 3 positions. That's 150 visits a year. There's 5,000 farms. So we certainly aren't raising our hands to do the phase 2s any faster, because they are incredibly time consuming.
Yep. Yeah, it's just because like Bedford has 20 of them phase 2s a year. So that's why I was just like, whoa, we've got more fun.
Yeah.
And isn't there a limitation in the phase 2 funding about doing the verification? I thought that came up previously. That you could,
some more or less like double dipping.
Yeah.
Something
where they were worried about that from an accounting standpoint.
Yeah. I mean, there are some counties, like I think Bradford's an example. They got all of their phase 1 inspections done very early, but I think for some reason 1,500 farms sticks in my head of how many is in their county. And I think they just threw everything at them and got them done. But I'm not even sure if they're still in the program to do phase 2s. They may have done that and said, we're out. But yeah, I don't look forward to the time of when we have to do more of those, because plus we're going to run into a lot more people that dig in their heels. And I really think, this is purely my opinion, that DP is going to change their tune when you get to doing all phase 2s, because it's going to become a lot more difficult on their end if people dig in their heels and they refuse to do this stuff. I don't know how they're going to approach that with their limited staff and limited legal department, but that's for them to worry about.
Mike, is this all part of, like in Maryland, is this all part of self-reporting?
There's some, yeah, to a certain degree, with how they have it set up in the self-reporting.
I'm just thinking from Caitlin, I appreciate how you laid it out in the beginning, that there's a DEP element to this and like the working within the parameters, but then there's an MEB and a Bay-wide perspective for being able to tell the story of here's Pennsylvania's thing, and then here's how it fits in, or it is reflected not the same way in some other area, but how we could do it.
So I want to chime in here just because I'm not doing any of the verification work myself, but I am the one responsible to make sure that LFT is performing on its contract for a CAP coordinator. And, we have indicated we would do 120 farm visits as part of that role this year. And so I want to, and here we are in Q2 already. I want to make sure that we have enough. Do we, Gordon and Caitlin, others, have enough to go off of here as far as getting Gordon equipped on these 120 farm visits when it comes to not only site selection, but what we're actually looking for him to do when he's out there? Is it, I heard some mention of doing visits together still. Is that still happening? Or, I mean, do we envision all 120 visits this year being sort of these joint visits, or is there any opportunity for Gordon to be sort of let loose on his own, maybe for these annual practices, if that's where we think that he's whilst we sort out some of these bigger picture things? I have concerns about not spending enough attention on actually delivering on what we said we would do this year as far as 120 farms while we try to figure out some of this bigger picture stuff and want to get him rolling on before it's too late for us to try to cram in 120 in the fall. So I just want to throw that out there. I want to make sure that there's enough direction for our team. And I don't know that I feel confident about that yet. I don't know about you, Gordon.
Well, according to Caitlin, since we don't have an engineer, I'm not big, small, or anything between. So that would mean on LFT farms, Caitlin's going to have to go out and do it, or somebody from the district. Or, I mean, unless we contract with a consultant that has an engineer on their team. Obviously, the engineer's not going to go out on these visits. They're going to send somebody else that does outreach for the firm. I mean, when we started talking about verification a couple years ago, I did some of the training and had some of that certification. Obviously, no matter who goes out to inspect a manure storage or a barnyard, you can't inspect what you can't see. So whether you're an engineer or a layman like myself, I can see a crack in concrete, I can see a curb that's knocked off, etc. But I'm not lobbying for a job here. But Jeb's exactly right. How do we? I mean, taking two of us to go out and verify do the on-site work that's just a waste of somebody's time. I mean, if one person can do it, why do you need two? So that's, to me, that's kind of where we're at right now. If Caitlin's the only one that can do it, she'll have to do it all herself. It doesn't make sense for me to ride along just to be the companion for the day. That gets a little expensive. It's not probably a waste of dollars. Then the other reason we have 120 on the list and catchment farms is to catch the outreach at the same time. And Caitlin doesn't, she's not the outreach person, she's the verification person. So, again, do you justify two of us going out where I do the outreach and she does the verification?
I think by us going together, we can do the combination of doing the outreach and the verification together, and then so that way you meet your 120 requirements, but also still get the outreach. So it's because I am limited in my outreach capacities and you have a quantified goal of what you guys need to reach, and you unfortunately are only able to do annual practices, it becomes a matter of, okay, well, if there's a site that has all annual practices, which is not very common but happens, then if there are no engineered multi-year practices, then yeah, Gordon, you could head out on those. They are far and few between, but it could help us narrow it down. So yeah, it'll definitely, the main goal of verification is not to have us be engineers. It's so that we can find the symptoms specifically of malfunction, not necessarily the core cause. So we can observe that, yes, this manure storage is filled with water. We can observe that. We can tell that it's not functioning as proper. We don't need to necessarily know, is it because of rainwater? Is it because groundwater is coming up? We don't necessarily need to know the answers to those questions. We just need to know that based off of these symptoms, we can either deny or confirm verification, and then we would get an engineer involved to determine the core cause of that, as the next steps after verification, helping these people out. But the fact that without the engineer on staff, it does limit, it does make this complicated. And we will have to continue to figure out going about this in a way that makes sense for everyone. But you're right, Gordon, this is
No,
not an easy task for us to tackle.
Yeah, no disrespect, Caitlin, but if the person that's doing the verification just has to be capable of determining whether practice is working or not, they just deny the verification. You know, the follow-up is obviously going to be somebody that researches that a little bit further. So I'm not sure why I would be limited to just annual practices. Not, you know, that's spelled out in some sense, you know, the end of the game. But
It's a great question. Yeah, that
you know,
is.
again, the other thing I look at here is everybody's got their eyes on Lancaster County.
Yes.
And obviously verification is something that needs work on to get figured out. I think we've got some great minds and some great ideas here. Is this where we start having some serious communication with DEP or EPA and say, you know, what you're proposing is not practical? And you know,
Yeah. That's sort of where I'm wondering if Caitlin, if I'm recalling that document that you're referencing, DEP referred to that as guidance, guide rails. And maybe I'm reading into this or maybe I'm wrong on this, but is there the opportunity for us to say, thank you for your guide rails, DEP. Here's how we're gonna do it.
They suck. No, of course not. But
Right, here's how we're gonna do it. We have Gordon. Everyone knows Gordon. Tell us if this is how we plan to do it. Tell us if we're wrong, sort of situation. Or is that, I mean, are they gonna throw all of the data out if we just send Gordon out there to verify manure pits anyway? And he's not an engineer, and you know, but we say this is how Lancaster's gonna do it. I don't know.
That's where a lot of this comes back to. I mean, DEP set up these guidelines so that this data that gets verified is defendable, because they get pushback when it goes into going down to the groups to go in the Bay model. It has to be defendable of who verified it and where it came from. As we said many times, a lot of these practices, if you truly are verifying them, that they're built to spec, a terrace, you should be going out and resurveying it and reverse engineering it to verify that it's still up to snuff with how it was built. Clearly, we're not going to do that. I mean, you want to talk about lack of manpower and time, that's a prime example. But they fall back on the district or NRCS, who doesn't want to play ball with us with that. So they fall back on the district's expertise to do that. So I'm assuming in a perfect world, this would be all district staff doing this verification work, and this wouldn't even be a discussion. But the fact that now it's branching out to third parties, that has been DEP's way of making it defendable, that either you are limited on what practices you can do, or you have certain criteria. I believe we were looking at, they originally told us like 40 hours of shadowing time or something for Gordon to go with the district. I think we necked that down to 20, but that's what it's all boils down to, is defendability, which they can defend the districts because it's essentially an extension of them through delegation stuff. And I mean, I view it as who they can blame if the stuff's wrong. And if it's third parties, their limitation then is like, where does the buck stop? Do you know what I mean? Does that make sense how I'm saying that? So that's why they put those guide rails on. I don't know if they can just wave the wand and say, yep, it's anybody can do it, because one, it isn't just them that has to say on what's going into the model. And two, we have to be cautious of what we're putting into Practice Keeper, because ultimately it is the district's data source. So I think it would be risky to go forward, do all the work, and then have them reject it all, in my opinion. But that's just me.
I think those conversations are definitely important, and that pushing some of those guidelines, those guide rails, is probably what it's going to come down to. But
An example I can give for data that was rejected. Matt, maybe you can refresh my memory on how many years ago it was that they did the farmer survey where Penn State put out the survey to, it was like Penn Ag members. I don't remember who all got the survey, but it was the first attempt at verification to gather data to put into the model to say, here's what farmers are doing. They hardly accepted any of it because it wasn't verified. It was a limited pool of people who it went to, but all that effort was put into doing the survey, and then they didn't accept most of the data anyway. So I mean, that's slightly different. It wasn't boots on the ground, but I'm just using that as an example of you put all this effort into something and then they didn't accept the data.
Yeah, I kind of recall that as well, but I'm wondering, is this an opportunity, like it always is for Lancaster, to be the guinea pig and kind of be the one that they have to look to? And is it an opportunity to us to say very similar to what they do with the cover crop survey, where if Gordon goes out and does a couple projects or a couple BMPs that are engineered and we do a 10% check-in on what he's been doing, would that qualify for him being allowable to do some of these verifications? I'm just throwing that out there. Like I said, I don't know what DEP, once again, I agree with you, Kevin, it's more about the defendability of it. But if we can show that, like they seem to approve that process of doing some sort of, that's I understand, high res and some other things from a satellite, but is that a possibility that we throw that out? Because we're not going to get too much guidance from them. I just don't see that happening in any regard.
I was even wondering if we could just use, I mean, rather than running a second person out to check on this stuff, I mean, you're taking pictures of these things already when you do the verifications, correct, Caitlin and Gordon? So that could, in my opinion, would be another option to at least try to get through of, you go out, you verify a waterway, you lay a tape measure down, show how wide it is, show the depth. Those are two pictures that can be included with showing the actual entire structure. That shows us then that what you're basing the okaying on of that practice. That's something that I think would be a possibility too. And that's just a couple extra pictures.
Another aspect that we have to this is I had developed that two different versions of the verification form, one for in-house here at the district, and then one for if any third parties were to verify. And it was identical with the exception that at the very bottom, in the last page, it had a section where it was like internal use only, where it would allow me to review it and sign off that I agreed on the decision based off of the evidence provided. And every site, we are taking photos that are date, time, location stamped. We are taking notes on the why we are to justify the decision made with verification. And theoretically, if a third-party person went out and if they took the photos and they described the conditions thoroughly enough, if I felt like I was able to confirm verification based off of that data, that evidence, I would be able to then sign off on it and confirm that, yes, like I agree with the decision that was made. So that's another option, theoretically. So
that sounds great to me. What you laid out right there, Caitlin. I mean, that sounds ideal. Like, you know, Gordon's taken away the brunt of the field work in that scenario, and he's getting you enough evidence that then you can sign off on it. I think that's sort of what we're all aiming at here. You know, allows you to spend your time on other field work, and then you're basically just doing that, the key point check there on his evidence he submits, and then it gives you enough confidence to put it in Practice Keeper.
Yeah, I think maybe Caitlin just would have to outline with the different practices, what are some of the key areas that you'd want to get pictures of. So like, for example, a pipe outlet terrace, get a picture of the riser pipe, get a picture that shows the channel width, get a picture of the outlet. Those are the three things that we would look at anyway. Then you know you're good to go, that we can get a good idea. Roof gutters, you show the gutters on the roof, you show where it's actually outletting, that's okay. So I think just nailing down what specific things you need to be comfortable with saying something's good. I mean, honestly, very similar to what you and I just went through, Jeb, with looking at the cap verification stuff.
Mhm.
Once you get an idea of what I'm looking for with that stuff, I think it makes it a little bit more clear on what we do. So same thing with Caitlin and Gordon, you get on the same page, and maybe that's an option. What do
I
you
think
what do you
that-
do in like Perry, or what county was that you guys were doing verifications? How was that? How was that?
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Gordon.
That was Dauphin County, and basically they had aerial imagery, and we just went out and double checked that what they identified from the aerial imagery was actually a practice. So we had a couple golf greens that were supposedly manure storages and, horse corrals and so forth. But it was fairly accurate. I mean, you could easily tell waterways, but obviously you couldn't tell the condition of the waterway as far as, whether it had a lot of sediment in it. So I know we're getting close to the end of the time, and I have to run here in a minute or two, but I think, we're on to something here. So Caitlin and I, at the beginning of the year, had 50 farms of the 75 we had last year that we didn't get verified. 20 of those farms we didn't have any plans for. And a number of those I've gone out and visited. They didn't have plans. LFT is in the process of writing plans. So we have what I'm saying is that we have about 30 left. So 25 or so of those, maybe Caitlin and I could go out and do them together, and we kind of refine this. What pictures do we actually need? What should they look like? Maybe out of that 30 that's left, we can pick out, 10 or all of them maybe, that have these different practices that we need to quantify what the evidence looks like that I need to bring back in. And then she can put that together. And so, other third parties, as money or dollars available, the Team Ags, the Red Barns, or other groups could do some verification work if we have the procedure documented.
I think probably, Gordon, that's the best way to go about it, is just documenting that when you're going out doing that. So we have that defendability that Kevin talked about, that we can go back to DEP and say, look, without the guidelines you gave us, this is what we went off of. This is what we're shooting for. This is the training that Gordon and LFT went through Caitlin. This is what we're putting forward. Unless we hear something differently, which once again, I'm not sure we're going to get that. And you guys have a goal to reach. We have a goal to reach. That might be our best option at this point.
Matt,
Yeah,
with
that the 50 farms that Gordon referenced, that is most, through a separate project we're working on with the Clean Water Partners. It's all tied. They're all farm visits achieving very similar goals. But so I think that would be, in addition to the work we're looking to achieve on those 50 farms from a project management perspective, verifying and using that time to further refine this process so that we can have that nailed down for the 120 cap related visits that we want to do the rest of this year.
Yeah, I think if we nail down the process in the next, say, 2 months, then have the rest of the year to knock off the 120.
Yeah. Okay.
And create the scenario that to bring other third party verifiers in, if funds are available, and they can work by catchments or even townships. Yeah, I think it's a good place to go. So Caitlin, I'll be in touch with you, and we'll figure out what farms and how we want to visit and so forth.
Sounds good. I've got just about all the paperwork ready.
Okay. And I did share some of the no plan farms that I visited.
Yes.
Been to a couple more, so get caught up on that. Figure out
you.
what the work looks like. Okay.
Matt, what you outlined, it sounds like it wouldn't actually be ready until 2 months or so. Like Gordon, you're saying DEP always asks us for agenda items. the next time we meet as a team with them is Wednesday of next week. Should I be flagging any of this at this time, or is this like present to them after we've done it?
I think prompting them to just say, look, we're using your guidelines. This is what we're going off of because our CAP coordinator has obligations they're needing to meet, and we're working with them on this plan. We will keep you abreast as to where we're going with this in regards to the next 2 months. Questions, comments? Let's hear them now, because we don't want to. I would rather go through that now as opposed to we put it together in 2 months and they say, no, we don't want to do that. So I'd say, yeah, let's put it out there, get all that crap now, because more than likely they're still going to come back in 2 months and say something else. Who knows? But at least we put it out there and at least put it out for them to get some feelers back on.
And it's not going to cost us that much to do a little bit of work, get 20, 30 farms done and process started, then let them review it and give them a thumb. Let them give us a thumbs up.
And as usual, they'll use us as guinea pigs, and we'll just, Lancaster did it, why can't anybody else? So did you have something, Kevin?
Well, I was just going to say, I've used this argument recently when we've gotten some pushback from NRCS with us verifying their practices in this process. Something everybody needs to keep in mind here is that the verification process, how that data ends up in Practice Keeper, ultimately in the model, is just a different avenue than the planning process. If you're writing a plan and there's a planner that goes and writes a new plan for a farm, and there's an existing waterway and there's cover crop being done and a manure storage, that planner is making a judgment call and saying that those practices are implemented and functioning when they put them in the plan as implemented. That plan then and those practices get entered into Practice Keeper without independently of going through this whole process. So that's something to keep in mind for us to justify how we're going about this if DEP would question it, because it's two paths to the same end result. It goes in Practice Keeper. Maybe 10 years down the road, it gets re-verified then, but it's still ultimately ending up in there through the planning process, which is a different track than the verification process. So something to keep in mind.
The only thing that I foresee being an issue with that is the fact that in order to do a plan review, there's a paywall. Like they have to pay for a plan review, right? So, and with verification, like we would only be able to do it if they were willing to have their plan be updated and reviewed. Or am I getting things mixed up?
Yeah, I'm just saying that it's the same process. Those BMPs still end up in Practice Keeper regardless. And it's just it's just an admin review that no one's going out. So for example, Kevin does an inspection, finds a farm that doesn't have a conservation plan or Ag&S plan. They hire a consultant to write a plan to meet their requirements. That plan either comes in here or goes up to DEP, gets admin reviewed to make sure that the plan meets the planning requirements. And if there's practices in there, those practices get entered into Practice Keeper regardless. No one's checking them because they are assuming that the planner has the expertise to identify that stuff as being implemented. Now, again, if they get pulled for an inspection a year from now and you go out and the practice isn't functioning and the plan said that it was, okay, you have to either reinstall the practice or do something. But initially, my point is that it's still ending up in Practice Keeper without someone going out and verifying it the way we're doing it now.
Basically, if Gordon was writing them a new plan, if he was a plan writer and writing them a new plan and he saw the manure storage is already out there, he would be doing some level of verification.
You are correct.
And putting that in the new plan.
You are correct. And that, because that was my argument with NRCS when they took exception to us verifying some of their practices. But it's, to me, it's a moot point, because if you're writing a plan, you're going through those motions anyway. It's just not called verification, it's called planning. So
Interesting.
Yeah. Hey, I got to run, folks. I'll be in touch, Caitlin. Sounds like we have a plan. Okay. Thanks.
All righty. Thanks. Make sure I'd heard.
Mike's shaking his head enough, so it must be clear as mud.
All solved. You can always come here. It's all good.
Definitely complicated trying to figure out what makes the most sense getting this done. So appreciate everybody coming together today to talk about all this. If anybody has other questions, feel free to email me. And Matt, I'll probably I'll stop by your office then. But yeah, I appreciate everybody coming today.
And then Allison, I'm assuming this will probably be maybe we'll at least have some time set aside at each of our monthly CAP coordinator meetings, not maybe this much time, but 10 minutes or so to make sure that just to get an update for the rest of the crew here on what Caitlin and Gordon are working on so that we can be ready to roll in June for the rest of the verification.
Yeah, for sure. Like you said, to stay on timeline and on task with the way that this is a bigger part of the scope this year. So I appreciate you asking that question, Jeb, of making sure that we have what we need so you guys can meet that deliverable.
All righty. Thanks, Caitlin. Appreciate
Thanks, Caitlin.
this.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
See you,
Thanks.
everyone.
Thanks.